Hello there, I'm NathaliaMelo, your unfiltered fit BFF, mom of two turned CEO of a fitness empire. Someone who understands the struggles of trying to stay fit, sane, and sexy, all while juggling work, life, and motherhood. And this is the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. Follow along wherever you're listening and join me weekly as I help busy working moms just like you simplify their fitness journey so they can lose weight, regain their confidence, and feel sexy AF. It's time to stop living in the what ifs and hiding from the cameras. It's time to regain control over your body, feel sexy naked, and wear a bikini confidently. People already see you as a super confident woman, but it's time for you to feel the same way too. Let's go. Hello there, fam. Welcome to another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast. I'm NathaliaMelo, your host. And today we are going to be talking about the influence that parents have on a child's relationship with food, with their bodies, and with obesity. And there are two reasons why I am doing this podcast today, especially in the sense of how parents' behavior in an environment that they create can impact a child or their children. And there are two reasons. The reason number one is that World Obesity Day was on March 4th. So I thought that it would be a good time to talk about this. And number two is because recently I made a reel on my Instagram. If you don't follow me, check the show notes and you can follow me there. And I was talking about how if you have a child that is overweight, the environment and the example that you set can have a big impact on your children to also change their behaviors. And never in my mind did I think that there was going to be some kind of controversial statement, because I'm a big believer, and there is also research that supports this, that the environment in which you are raised has a big influence on what you become. I'm not saying that it's like, oh, if you're raised on this, that's exactly what you're going to become, because we have plenty of examples of people that, are raised in a very poor environment and they go on to do great things. But as a general norm, we are a product of our environment. And you wouldn't be any different for kids. And I can say this, and that's what brings me to another part why it's important for me to talk about this, because as somebody who was an 80s child, and, all the folks who are 70s, 80s, and early 90s kids out there, you're going to resonate with this. I was raised in a household where the conversation around crash diets and cyclical weight gain, weight loss was the norm. I grew up watching my mom doing the cabbage soup diet, the salad diet, the lettuce only diet, the fruits only diet, the, shakes only diet, you name it. I watched my mom do that and gain 20 pounds, lose 20 pounds, gain 30 pounds, lose 30 pounds, gain 25 pounds, in that constant cycle. So I am not new to kind of almost becoming a bit of a product of the environment, because for a long time, that's how I too lived my life, because I always thought that was the norm, the extremes. And then whenever I start competing, all hell broke loose. And then eventually I learned about different ways of doing things, also because of the research, which that kind of like brings me to something that I want to say before I start diving into the conversation today. I try to be very open to different opinions, especially when it comes to health and fitness. Because, for example, when I was competing for a long time, I would have conversations with Lane Norton, who has always been a big advocate of flexible eating and, a more balanced approach. And I thought that he was absolutely full of shit. And I met Lane in several events around the world, and we always would talk. And I was very reluctant to accept what he was saying. But then I looked at the research and I'm like, oh shit, like he kind of knows what he's talking about. And that's one of the reasons that I start to change my approach to food as well. Obviously, also watching how detrimental it was for my mental health, but having the data helped me change. And I'm not opposed to change. I'm not opposed to seeing things from a different perspective, but I also like data. And again, like Lane says, data over feelings. So that's what we are going to be touching on today, because just recently I made a post on my social media talking about how, if you have a child who is overweight, one of the biggest changes that you can make to help your child is changing you, making an effort to change yourself, change the environment that is being offered to your child and to yourself. Because how are you going to expect your child to eat broccoli and to have a healthy relationship with food if the environment in which that child is in doesn't support that? How are you going to expect your child to, have a bowl of salad with grilled chicken? Not that that's the only thing that works. I'm just using it as an example. If you have never brought a bag of lettuce home and every single day everybody's door dashing and ordering Uber Eats, how is that child supposed to understand the importance of a homemade meal if everything is always coming from a driver that drops the food off in your door and that you have very little control over the caloric components of that meal? So never did I think that this was going to be a discussion that would be remotely controversial, but hey, here we are. And that's what I love about this podcast. It allows me to elaborate on the things that I see on social media, comments that I see, and to respond to it with data, because I find that sometimes on social media, it can get very heated and it's hard to cite. It's hard to process information and for me to read all the researches and respond accordingly. So that was the post. I talked about the impact that the parents' behavior have on a child and whether they are obese or not. And then somebody who is a doctor said, I have to disagree with you. I'm an obesity board certified physician, and I can tell you that obesity is not the parents' fault. Okay. Unfortunately, we live in a society where parents have a small fighting chance against obesity. Also, obesity, overweight is multifactorial. It's not a lifestyle problem. It's genetics, hormonal, environmental, food industry, endocrine disrupting chemicals. All of this promotes obesity. Definitely, setting a healthy example is important, but for the majority of people with obesity is not enough. Now, I'm not saying that everything there is absolutely terrible. And again, this is a hill that I'm willing to die on. And I appreciate that this lady is an obesity doctor. But whenever you're looking at the data, which I'm going to share with you here, it is very, very, very clear. Do genetics play a role in whether or not a child is going to be overweight or obese? 100%. However, there needs to be a combination of lifestyle, environmental changes, and genetics. So if you have just the genetical variation, but everything else is being controlled in a sense of, you have somebody who has the predisposition to be obese or overweight. However, you're raising that child in a more, I don't like to use the word healthy because we all know that healthy can be relative from person to person, but an environment that is going to support a healthier BMI and a slimmer physique and creating and nurturing better eating and exercise habits. So let's start looking at the data to see what the data says. All the research that I cite here is going to be mentioned in the show notes. So here you have it. So we have this article from 2014. The title is Obesity a Disease or a Behavior Abnormality? And there is this part here that says, environmental influences are another major contributor to obesity. The so-called obesogenic environment with its reduced food costs the especially plentiful, high-calorie dense foods, larger serving portions, reduced physical activities, and the influential food industry are likely contributors. US government food policy in the 1970s are also to be contributor to obesity. I agree with everything that is said here. Okay? Absolutely, the reduced cost of food has made more calorically dense foods available to people, and they're highly palatable, so you can consume more. We have a much larger serving size. And I can say this because I have lived in Europe and I have seen the sizes of servings in Europe, and compared to here, it is different. So people here are eating substantially more. Physical activity and influential food industry. These are all contributing factors. However, we cannot take the responsibility away that a parent has to reduce perhaps the consumption of those high calorically dense foods. Maybe not making it as available in the house. Is it a contributing factor that foods that are high in calories, they're available out there 100%, but it is also a parent's responsibility to buy or not buy that food, to make it available to their children or not. The larger portions, also, it is something that can be controlled unless you're eating out every single day. And even if you're eating out every single day, and again, I understand that for someone who is already obese, these things are easier said than done. I understand that. But just because it's hard, it doesn't mean that it's impossible. And it doesn't mean that the responsibility still does not fall on the responsible adult on the household. And that's the problem that I have. I am sure that dealing with obesity, we have several members in the Powerhouse Academy who are adults that came to us obese. And we have helped them navigate because it isn't just about the food. There is also many people that have a traumatic response to food, and they eat because eating has been their coping mechanism to traumas and stresses in life. So looking at food as just this one dimension thing would be ignorant of me, and you would be unrealistic to expect that a person is just a one-sided thing that doesn't come to a relationship with food or a relationship with their bodies without variables that come with it. But we cannot take the personal responsibility that these people still have to have. Because, yes, we can sit here and blame the influential food industry. Yes, it is hard. I am a parent. I know it is hard, but it is still my job to help my children make better choices. And I understand that not a lot of parents have the same level of education that we have been fortunate enough to have in my house. But it is still something that you can control. So let's go here to another research. And the title of this one is Childhood Obesity Causes and Consequences. And again, these are all going to be linked below. I'm going to read here a part of this other research that I'm reading. Quote, review of the literature investigates factors behind poor diet and offer numerous insight into how parental factors may impact on obesity in children. They note that children learn by modeling parents' and peers' preferences, intake, and willingness to try new foods. Availability of and repeated exposure to healthy foods is key to developing preferences and can overcome dislike of foods. And listen, I'm going to keep on repeating myself. I have a child who has pediatric feeding disorder, which is something that makes it very hard for him to try different things. But it doesn't mean that we have stopped exposing that child to different things. Here's another part of the same study. Family factors have also been associated with the increase of cases of obesity. The types of food available in the house and the food preferences of family members can influence the foods that children eat. In addition, family meal times can influence the type of foods consumed and the amount thereof. Lastly, family habits, whether they are sedentary or physically active, influence the child. Studies have shown that having an overweight mother and living in a single parent household are associated with overweight and childhood obesity. End quote. This is from the research. Again, this is not negating the impact of genetics, the impact of, psychological factors. These are all being taken into consideration. But we need to learn to take ownership and control what we can, control what is possible for us to control. So now is the conclusion. And again, I don't like to go straight to conclusions to researches because there are a lot of things said in between that I like to read. But here's the conclusion, and you're welcome to read the whole thing. Everything is going to be cited down below. The growing issue of childhood obesity can be slowed if society focuses on the causes. There are many components that play into childhood obesity, some being more crucial than others. A combined diet and physical activity intervention conducted in the community with a school component is more effective at preventing obesity or overweight. Moreover, if parents enforce a healthier lifestyle at home, many obesity problems could be avoided. What children learn at home about eating healthy, exercising, and making the right nutritional choices will eventually spill over into other aspects of their lives. These will have the biggest influence on the choices kids make when selecting foods to consume at school and fast food restaurants and choosing to be active. Focusing on these causes may, over time, decrease childhood obesity and lead to a healthier society as a whole. Again, all these studies that I'm showing you, they talk about, the other factors. We do understand that there are other factors that we might not be able to control. I cannot control my genetics. I might have had great genetics when it comes to staying lean, maybe, but there are a lot of other very much screwed up stuff that my genetics were like, oh, cute, that I cannot have control of, but I can change my environment and can make the necessary adjustments to my environment to make sure that I am not letting chance meet my genetics and then I'm royally screwed. And this isn't just about me. Like I used myself as an example just because, but do we have societal problems in the sense of reduced wages? Yes. Do we have, parents that are struggling to find the time to exercise? 100%. But it is still the parent's responsibility to educate that child. We cannot, as a society, take away the personal responsibility that people have to make decisions in their lives. Nobody's saying that it's going to be easy. Nobody's saying that this is a problem that is easy to be fixed. Nobody's saying that, a mother that is working 2 jobs and earning minimum wage, that this is going to be something that is going to be easily applied. But at the same time, what I do not accept or tolerate is the fact that we are taking the personal responsibility away from people and creating that environment of, for me, the victim mentality and everybody's a winner. Oh, it's not your fault. No, yes, it is. It is. There is a layer of it that it is your fault. Maybe not 100%, but at least 50% it is. So let's go to another study, because one thing that I was like, okay, what if we have somebody who is adopted? Because there is a very heavy proponent that genetics play a big role, which it does. Okay. Genetics play a big role in whether or not the child is going to be obese, especially the mother. If the mother is obese, there is a higher chance that the child will be obese as well. There is a lot of speculation on that, but that's beside the point for the purpose of this conversation today. So here we have another study that is vertical transmission of overweight, evidence from a sample of English adoptees. And as you scroll down, there is a part here that says identifying the role of parents play in the development of overweight seems particularly important. It is possible that the spread of overweight among children can be attributed in large parts to the influence of parental norms, including unhealthy role modeling. And then he has a citation there. Children may consciously or unconsciously observe and model themselves on their parents, especially with regards to fitness and to food consumption. Indeed, there is evidence that children's caloric intake, diet habits, level of physical activities, and health behavior in general are at least partially dictated by their parents' health behavior and culturally determined social norms. And this is very aligned with the previous study that I cited. And if we scroll down here, it mentions the conclusion because this is a study that has been done with biological kids and kids that were adopted. Our results reveal that when both parents are overweight, children have an increased likelihood of also being overweight, irrespective of whether they are adopted or biological children. More specifically, when both parents are obese and not just overweight, the likelihood of the offsprings being overweight increases by 17.7% points amongst biological children, but only by 4.5 percentage points when children are adopted. This suggests that transmission of overweight when both parents are obese is not merely genetic, and that vertical cultural transmission plays an independent role. And vertical cultural transmission is whenever it goes kind of like from the parents to the kids. So this is another research that shows that yes, there is the influential fact of genetics, but we cannot ignore that even for adopted children, there is also an increased weight gain for the children that are adopted. And they are not genetically connected. They don't have any association. So again, we can see here and talk about the genetics piece of it. We can see here and talk about the societal impacts and the changes in household with both parents being working parents. Yes, these are all very real problems. But as parents, we also need to take personal responsibility and accountability for the environment that we are creating for our children. I'm not saying that it's easy, but I'm saying that it is part of what we signed up for whenever we decided to have kids. And then there is another one. So let's go to the next one. This one is called a genetic analysis of weight and overweight in 4-year-old twin pairs. The sample included 3,636 4-year-old twins born in the UK in 1994. And the results. At 4 years of age, genetic factors contributed substantially both to individual differences in weight throughout the distribution and to the mean weight difference between overweight children and the rest of the population. Unlike results later in life, weight and overweight in 4-year-old also suggest substantial shared family environmental influence. Then we have the conclusion. Overweight is the quantitative extreme of genetic and environmental factors responsible for normal variation in weight in childhood. Genes associated with overweight are likely to be associated with a variation in weight throughout the distribution as assumed by quantitative trait locus, QTL theory. These findings linking weight and overweight in childhood have far-reaching implications for molecular genetic attempts to identify specific genes responsible for genetic influence, for investigating pathways between genes and behavior, and for intervention and prevention. So, yes, there is a genetic factor, but it is the extreme of genetic and environmental factors that are responsible for variation. Again, we cannot change the genetics. That is something that we just have to accept. But we cannot sit here and just keep on saying, oh, my genetics are the problem, when there is also the other part of the equation, that there is the environment and the relationship that you create, the lifestyle that you create. So to say that it is not a parent's fault for a child to be overweight is emphatically incorrect, because we have the genetic piece, which, like, it is the parent's fault. Even if unwanted, it is the parent's fault. And the environmental piece of it, which it is something that the parents can control. And if it is not properly nurtured, it is the parent's fault. And I'm not saying this to shame parents. No, I am a parent. Am I great every single day? No. There days that I go to bed and I'm like, fuck, I could have done better as a parent today? Absolutely. Often, all the time. So I'm not saying this as a way to shame parents, because I know a lot of the people listening to this podcast are parents. I am saying this, however, as a way to bring attention to the fact that we cannot sit here and keep on blaming the universe for something that is ultimately still under our control. We control what we can and accept the things that we cannot change and that we cannot control. We cannot control our genetics, but we can control the environment that we create for our children to develop healthier habits, better relationships with food. Yes, there is a big problem with the food industry. Yes, highly palatable food, they're easily accessible and they're cheap, 100%. But children are just going to be exposed to that on a regular basis if that's what they see at home, day in and day out. Do we have a problem with accessibility of, cheaper, healthier food options to lower income households? 100%. But you can find at Walmart bags of peas and bags of frozen vegetables for $1 or $2. It's not going to be perfect, but it can be done. Rice is cheap, and people are not getting overweight because they're eating a bunch of rice. Shit, look at Asian folks. I was blown away whenever I went to Japan. And that's one thing that I find that is incredible, the privilege that I've had to visit so many different parts of the world, because it helps me understand how the environment helps people look a certain way. Whenever I was in Japan, their portions are tiny. You always leave the table. I was still hungry, but I was too embarrassed to ask for another plate because, the food was like just that serving. And a lot of times we were in a rush and, anyway. And I walked everywhere. There's so much walking. So we need to understand that there is the contributing factors that we can create for our children to thrive. And then last but not least, we have this other research, which is going to be linked to a PDF. And this research says, perhaps one of the biggest influences of parents on children's overweight and obesity is genetics. We have already established that. As noted, genetics alone cannot explain the increases in obesity in recent decades. But parents may pass along to their children susceptibility to overweight in the presence of energy imbalance. Changes in the environment that affect energy intake or expenditure could then trigger weight gain in the susceptible population, differentiating clearly between the extent to which nature or nurture is responsible for the strong correlation between parents and child BMI can be difficult, though. It is known, for example, that parents influence children's food selection. Genetics and behavior can thus interact as both parents and children gain weight in households where more energy-dense foods are available. Similarly, children's physical activities can be affected by how active their parents are. Again, genes and behavior will interact as a household engage in more sedentary behaviors, with both parents and children gaining weight. And just to close up here, this is not a podcast about shaming parents, because parenthood is fucking hard as is. I get it. But this is a podcast about ownership and taking personal responsibility that, yes, although I wouldn't understand because I am not someone who lives in a overweight body. But those who live with obesity do face challenges with the hormonal fluctuation that impacts their cravings, that impacts their hunger and satiety hormone regulation. There are a lot of factors. And although many of those cannot be changed, and there is not much that can be done, we do need to accept and we do need to acknowledge that there is a layer of factors that can be changed. And we can see here and throw our hands up in the air and be like, yep, it's just how it is, genes suck and whatever. And then we're just going to let our kids become severely overweight. Or we can focus on the things that are under our control, that are something that we can change, that we can have a positive impact on, that we can influence our kids on. And that is what the message of this podcast is. It's not negating that obesity is complex. It is not just about telling somebody, move more, eat less. It is not that simple. If it were that simple, we wouldn't have the problem of obesity that we have nowadays. So there needs to be more education. Agreed. 100% believe on that. But just throwing in the towel and saying like, yep, it is a disease and it is a problem. And, lifestyle doesn't impact, environment doesn't impact. It's not the parents' fault. We are taking the last little bit of responsibilities that parents can take on themselves instead of just living on that acceptance state and just throwing the baby with the bathwater. We need to change the narrative. Yes, it is not easy. No, it's not simple. No, it's not just eat less, move more. No, if you were that simple, you'd have been done. But instead of focusing on the things that we cannot change, we need as a society to focus on the things that we can change. And that is not only going to be beneficial for the individual doing that, but it's also going to be incredibly beneficial for the child that is watching their parents live with an absolute next level grit and resilience. We are the change that needs to happen for our children. And just accepting the things just because, the chances are low to win the lottery. Yeah, a whole bunch of people are still playing. So are we just going to give up on making sure that our next generation is not absolute screwed by all the health problems that come with the obesity crisis that we have in this country right now? I don't think so. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you like this episode, please share. All the links to the researches and the studies that I have mentioned in this show are going to be down below. Let me know what you think. Leave a review, and I will speak to you soon. See you next week. Adios. Bye. Love you. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. But let me ask you, what was your aha moment in today's episode? I would love to know. You can leave me a comment or voice message at the link in the show description. You can also follow me on Instagram and let me know what topics you want to hear more about or who I should have on the show. As for today, this is it for today, guys. I'll see you back next week for another episode of the Unfiltered Fit Life podcast.